Sometimes, the strangest stories begin with the most ordinary things. You wake up, get ready, call a ride, go through security. Everything feels normal. No warning signs, no strange looks, nothing out of place. Just another quiet evening, a ride to the airport, and a late-night flight like so many before it. But sometimes, it's in those exact moments that something breaks. What you're about to hear is a true story. It happened to me on a red-eye flight from Los Angeles to New York. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. And even now, as I try to piece it all back together, there are moments when I can't believe it really happened. That it happened to me. Last week, I took a red-eye flight from Los Angeles to New York. Nothing unusual, I fly a lot for work. I even like night flights. Fewer people, more quiet, a chance to sleep. No lines, no rushing gates, no crying babies, just silence and the steady hum of the cabin. I called a ride around 11 p.m. The driver arrived quickly, a quiet man in his 40s wearing a baseball cap. He barely spoke, always looking straight ahead. The radio was off. We drove through empty streets. LA at that hour is nearly silent, especially away from downtown. Only headlights and a steady hum of tires. A few times, I caught myself staring at shadows between street lamps, probably just boredom. We arrived at the terminal just before midnight. I thanked the driver, grabbed my bag, and went inside. Inside, everything looked the same as always. Dim yellow lights, a breeze from the automatic doors. Someone rushing to the desk, another with their feet on a suitcase. A few passengers were sleeping, leaning on their backpacks. One person was arguing on the phone, but the sound seemed muffled by the ambient hum. I checked in, dropped my bag, all routine. My flight. 934. Departure at 1:45 a.m. to JFK. Status: on time. At every step, the lines were practically non-existent. At security, the guard barely glanced at my bag. No remarks, no hurry. TSA officers looked exhausted and expressionless, as usual. But one guard. He stared not at people or screens, but at a wall. Maybe he was lost in thought. I didn't think much of it. I walked toward the gate. The terminal was half empty. About 20 people were in the waiting area, some drinking coffee, some using tablets. A gate agent announced boarding would begin in 15 minutes. I sat by the window and checked my phone, nothing new. Wi-Fi was patchy, LTE unstable. It felt like everything around me had slowed slightly. I looked at my boarding pass. Seat 23. A. Window seat. Exactly how I like it. No disturbance, no aisle traffic. When boarding began, people stood slowly. No rush. No chaos. I barely remembered faces, just glimpses. A woman in a red sweater with headphones. A guy with a laptop and a backpack. A child clutching a stuffed bear. As I boarded the plane, I noticed something odd. One flight attendant stood with her back to boarding passengers, staring into a small service window. She didn't turn even as I passed by. The other checking boarding passes looked extremely tired, with dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't slept for a day. The cabin was nearly full. People took their seats quietly, hardly speaking. I took my seat, stowed my bag, and looked out the window. Outside, an illuminated runway, a few maintenance flashes, puddles on the tarmac from earlier rain. It looked completely calm, real nighttime stillness. I leaned back in my seat. Less than half an hour until takeoff. Minutes after boarding, the doors closed and standard pre-flight preparations began. Announcements came over the PA, calm, detached, as if pre-recorded. I didn't even listen. I knew the script. Fasten belts, turn off devices, flight duration just over 5 hours. Flight attendants walked down the aisle, checking seatbelts and seatbacks. None of them smiled. Not out of rudeness, exhaustion maybe, or something else I couldn't name then. The aircraft began to move. First slowly along the taxiway, then faster. Lights outside flickered service vehicles, runway lights. I felt the familiar thrust under my feet acceleration before takeoff. The engines roared. Some passengers had closed their eyes. Others stared at screens. The cabin was nearly dark aisle lights and a blue glow from screens. The takeoff was smooth. That familiar push into the seat. Then weightlessness as the landing gear rose. Seconds later, the city lights vanished beneath the wing. Below, darkness interspersed with clusters of roads and tiny dots of light. Once at cruising altitude, the cabin lights dimmed. Passengers settled in some grabbed blankets, others put on eye masks. I leaned back and stared out the window. Outside, almost nothing. Deep night sky, a few cloud banks far below. No landmarks. I was too high. At some point I smelled coffee. The flight attendants had began service. They hadn't reached me yet, but I heard a can open and a plastic cup snap somewhere behind me. The woman in the red sweater next to me scrolled her phone, listening to something. Photos of family flickered on her screen. We shared a brief glance and a polite half-smile. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I just rested and listened to familiar aircraft sounds. The low hum of engines, a faint beep from electronics, footsteps down the aisle. I knew and trusted these sounds. I've flown more in the past 2 years than I did in the rest of my life. But something in that moment felt off, as if the engine had picked up an alien tone, or the air had subtly shifted. I looked out the window again. For a split second, the wing appeared to dissolve into the darkness. Probably my eyes playing tricks. I blinked and rubbed them. It had been about 20 minutes since takeoff, and suddenly I realized it was too dark outside. Around 20 minutes after takeoff, we reached cruising altitude. I stared out the window and realized there was nothing to see. Not just darkness. Complete, utter blackness. At this altitude, even at night, you'd usually see stars, or moonlight reflecting off clouds, or distant aircraft lights. But there was none of that. Not a hint. I leaned in, pressing my forehead against the glass. Absolute blackness, no stars, no wing shape. It was as if we'd passed into a zone of pure void. For a moment I thought the window fogged, or the shade crept down. But the pane was crystal clear. I ran a fingertip across it. It was ice cold. Too cold for minus 50 degrees Celsius conditions. Almost unreal. I first felt genuine unease then. Not fear, more like subtle tension at the edge of awareness. My gut knew something was wrong before my mind could name it. Then came turbulence. At first, light and familiar. I didn't even think to buckle. 2 attendants pushing service trolleys stopped and exchanged glances. Seconds passed. Instead of calming, the shaking intensified. The seatbelt sign buzzed on. I buckled up. The woman next to me removed her headphones, glanced down the aisle, then back at her phone. But this turbulence felt strange. It wasn't jagged like storm turbulence. It was firm and resistive, like the plane was moving through something viscous, unseen. Then a sound emerged. Not sharp rattles, but a low hum just at the edge of hearing. It wasn't loud, more like a vibration inside the skull. At that moment, the captain spoke.
"Ladies and gentlemen, we're encountering a bit of unexpected turbulence. It won't be long. Please remain seated."
The words were familiar. I had heard them dozens of times. But the voice, it was wrong. Cold, dry, without emotion. No static, no mic click, no cabin background noise. Just a hollow, empty tone, almost like a recording. A chill ran down my spine. I'm usually composed during turbulence. This felt different, not a glitch. Something inside me decided, this is not normal. I turned toward the aisle. Passengers tensed. Some whispered. Others froze mid-seat, staring forward. The woman in the red sweater no longer scrolled. She stared out the window, unblinking, as if she too had noticed the darkness. The turbulence became stronger. Not stormy. More like the plane was pushing through dense resistance. Each tilt felt deliberate, unnatural. Small items slid off tray tables. From behind came a curse. The woman a few rows back reached into her bag for something. A child whimpered. In my ears, the pressure shifted even though altitude wasn't changing. The engine transformed. Higher, tense, like an old TV on full volume with no signal. I wanted to cover my ears, but externally it was still quiet. Only inside did I feel the vibration. I glanced down the aisle. The two flight attendants stood rigid at the front. One, the short-haired blonde, stared blankly forward. Neither moved. Their eyes were wide, pupils dilated. Their knuckles turned white as they gripped the cart, like they'd frozen in panic, but nobody hit the play button. I looked out the window again. Darkness outside remained unchanged, no clouds, no lights. A black abyss, like flying inside a vacuum. And then it happened. A flash of lightning flickered in the distance. Against that glow, I glimpsed something. On the wing, on the outer edge, near the green navigation light. A silhouette. At first, I thought it was a shadow or optical illusion. Then it moved. A hunched, elongated figure. No defined features, blurred and vague, like seen through an oily glass. Its presence didn't belong in this reality. It sat side on, facing the airflow. No face in any normal sense yet. I felt it was looking at me. I blinked. It vanished. The wing was clean, wet from rain. Only the green light flashed at its tip. I froze. Didn't know what to do. Speak up? Call an attendant? I glanced at the woman next to me. She stared at her phone, but her expression was tight, as if she sensed it too, yet couldn't admit it. I looked toward the aisle, and the plane lurched violently sideways, as if gripped and yanked from outside. Noise escalated. Passengers screamed. Some froze in place. Others wrapped arms around seats. The cabin rocked. Toward the rear, I heard a thud. One trolley flew and slammed into a bulkhead. Another jolt hit. It felt impossible, like we were torn through space, defying physics. Then a loud crack. Metal groaned, as if inside the fuselage began to fracture. Lights flickered, then went out. Total darkness. Screams. The screech of stressed metal. It felt like the plane was tearing apart in midair. I shut my eyes and gripped the armrests. 10 seconds. Maybe less. Maybe more. Then, silence. The lights returned. First, a flash, like a system reboot. Then smooth, even lighting as if nothing happened. The cabin looked familiar, but not normal. The engines hummed steadily again. No turbulence, no shaking. I inhaled deeply, heart racing. My hands trembled, shoulders tight. Everything looked almost exactly as before. Almost. I turned toward the aisle. The flight attendants were gone. Their service trolley stood abandoned near a divider, tilted but upright, as if someone left it and walked away. No voices, no footsteps, no uniformed staff anywhere. I turned left. The seat next to me empty. The woman in the red sweater was gone, but her belongings remained. Headphone cord draped over the armrest, a plastic cup with half a drink. No phone, no bag, no sign of her presence. It was as though she stood up for a moment and vanished. I scanned the cabin. Something felt off. At first glance, everything seemed fine, but the longer I looked, the clearer it became. There were fewer people. Not half the plane empty, but noticeably less than before. Empty seats scattered, some with blankets or water bottles beneath. Passengers seemed to have vaporized without collecting anything. I stood slowly, tentatively, listening. Silence. Not the normal quiet of a night flight, but deep, muffled silence. No coughing, no stirring, nothing. Just the drone of engines, muted as if heard through thick glass. I walked forward a bit, looked into the lavatory door slightly ajar. Inside, empty, lights on. I continued forward. On the floor lay an abandoned open bag. Inside, a cosmetic pouch, glasses case, snack wrapper. I glanced into a few rows. Passengers sat motionless, some with eyes closed, others staring at headrests. None moved. None looked around. I pressed the call button. It lit up. 5 seconds passed. 10. 30. No one responded. I took a seat again, clasped my knees, took a breath. It wasn't fear. It was numbness. A mental defense, trying to convince the body everything was okay, while the body already knew. Nothing is okay. After some indeterminate time, the pilot's voice came over again.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into JFK. Local time is 7:12 a.m. Thank you for flying with us.
Same voice. Still flat, empty, unreal like an answering service recording. No background noise. No cockpit ambiance. Just that precise, emotionless message. The plane started its descent. And again, no jolt, no tilt. Landing was too smooth, as if we gently slipped into a seat in time and space rather than touched down. I felt the landing gear meet the runway. A soft thud, smooth braking. That was it. We had landed. I waited for the usual announcements. Welcome to New York, or please stay seated, but none came. The plane stopped at the gate, but nothing in the speakers. Passengers got up, not all at once, slowly as if unsure it had ended. No rush, no chatter. I stood and walked down the aisle. Many remained seated. One man stared blankly ahead, not trying to unbuckle. A girl about 8 clutched a stuffed bear and stared at me without blinking. I reached the exit. No flight attendants. Cockpit door closed. No farewells, no one waiting at the door. I stepped into the jet bridge. It was empty. No staff, no movement. A few people walked ahead in silence, not turning around. I followed them, feeling not fear, but an overwhelming sense of unreality. We emerged into JFK Terminal. Everything was wrongly quiet. I stood trying to reconcile this with reality. Lights, people, clean floors, but too perfect, too sterile, like a staged set. I approached the arrivals board. It was electronic and updated every second. I found the relevant row. Flight 934 cancelled. Not landed. Not arrived. Cancelled. I stared blankly. Then again. And again. 3 times, same line each time. I walked to the information desk. Behind the glass sat an employee with an earphone. He looked up as I approached. "Excuse me," I said. "Flight 934 from Los Angeles. Just landed. Where do I collect my baggage?" He frowned and typed a few keys.
Repeat the flight number.
934 from LAX. Departed late last night. He checked the system. His face registered confusion.
I'm sorry. We don't have record of that flight. There was no flight 934 from LAX tonight. It's not in the system at all.
How is that possible? I pulled out my phone, ready to show boarding pass or screenshot. I unlocked it and it froze. The date on my phone displayed its yesterday's date. The day was exactly 1 day behind. Time read 6:41 a.m. But the pilot said, "We landed at 7:12. I tried refreshing. Wi-Fi was on, but nothing updated. Emails, tickets gone. My boarding pass had vanished. It was as if I'd never boarded at all. I took a few steps back. My body felt ice cold from within. I turned and saw him. At the terminal exit, near the door to the city, a person stood. Tall, dressed in black. He faced me, motionless, unblinking. He simply watched. I blinked, stepped aside. He still stared. When I looked away for a second, he was gone. I'm not sure he was ever there. I don't know what flight that was. I don't know what took place above the clouds. I don't know why nobody remembers I was on that plane. But one thing I do know, that flight was not meant to happen. And whoever or whatever was on that wing, it knows I saw it.